A millionaire's business trip was canceled at the very last moment, so he went to the hospital to visit his young daughter. But as he approached the room's entrance, a peculiar noise caught his attention. He carefully opened the door crack to peek inside and was immediately overcome with dread by the scene unfolding before him. A thick, overpowering scent of white lilies filled VIP room 12-4 at St. Jude Hospital. It was a fragrance meant to soothe, but in this moment, it only made the air feel denser and suffocating. Ethan Vance stood before the large mirror, his rough hands, the hands of a man accustomed to wielding considerable influence, awkwardly adjusting his tie knot. He observed his reflection as successful CEO of one of the region's largest real estate conglomerates, yet the deep shadows beneath his eyes betrayed the helplessness of a father. His flight to London was scheduled to depart in 2 hours. A crucial shareholder meeting that would determine the company's future awaited him, but his heart remained firmly anchored to the pristine white bed in the center of the room. "Daddy promises to be back in time for your birthday, my little princess." Ethan stepped closer to the bed, trying to force a reassuring smile. Despite the tightness gripping his chest, he gently stroked Lily's sparse hair. His 8-year-old daughter looked tiny, nestled beneath the thick comforter, her body so frail he feared a single firm touch might cause her to disappear. A severe heart condition that had struck 4 months ago had drained the vitality from the child who used to laugh so easily. Lily did not respond. Her wide brown eyes stared blankly at a fixed point on the ceiling. Her small hand gripped the edge of the blanket tightly, the knuckles turning ghostly white. "Don't worry yourself too much, honey. It will affect your trip." The gentle voice drifted from the sofa. Vanessa sat there holding a plump red apple and a gleaming paring knife. She moved the blade with graceful precision, separating the apple's peel in a single thin, unbroken ribbon, perfect much like her own polished demeanor. Clad in a modest cream-colored wool dress, Vanessa exuded the serene beauty of a woman who had willingly stepped away from the spotlight to support her partner. "I asked for extra soft pillows for her. The doctor said elevating her head helps with her breathing." Ethan looked at his fiancée with profound gratitude. Since Lily fell ill, Vanessa hadn't left her side. She had taken over all the duties that Lily's birth mother would have been expected to perform. "Thank you, Vanessa. Honestly, without you, I don't know how I would have managed this entire mess." The room door abruptly opened without a preliminary knock. Head nurse Brenda stepped in, her large figure nearly blocking the doorway. Her face was etched with the lines of stress and a habitually stern disposition. She offered no greeting, walking directly to the bedside with a tray of medicine. "Time for your injection. Sit up, don't make me ask twice." Brenda spoke curtly, her rough hand firmly pulling up Lily's sleeve. Lily flinched, a small moan escaping her throat as the cold needle found its mark in her delicate skin. Ethan frowned quickly, stepping in front of his daughter. "Could you possibly be gentler? She's in pain." Brenda looked up, her gaze holding none of the deference a staff member usually showed a VIP patient, but rather a silent judgment. "This medication needs to be delivered swiftly to be effective. If you coddle her too much, she'll never get better." "Ethan, please, let's keep calm." Vanessa was suddenly beside him. She gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, then turned to the head nurse with a cordial smile, though her eyes carried a subtle warning. "Nurse Brenda only has Lily's best interests at heart, don't you, dear? Let me hold her hand steady for you. Please carry on with your duties." Vanessa's understanding gesture calmed Ethan's rising irritation. He stepped back, watching Vanessa tenderly soothe the injection site on Lily's arm, silently counting himself lucky to have chosen such a supportive woman to entrust his family to. He had misjudged the difficult old nurse's excessive caution, but thankfully Vanessa always knew how to smooth things over. The incessant ringing of his phone in his suit pocket broke the awkward silence. It was his assistant calling. Time to leave. "Daddy has to go now?" Ethan bent down to place a kiss on his daughter's forehead. The smell of antiseptic overpowered her familiar scent of baby shampoo. Guilt washed over him. He was leaving her again, trying to compensate for his absence with expensive gifts. "I'll buy you that guardsman doll you like, okay? Try to be a good girl and listen to Mother Vanessa and the doctor." Just as he was about to withdraw his hand, Lily's frail, icy fingers unexpectedly grasped his sleeve. The grip was weak, but desperately urgent. Ethan leaned closer, seeing his daughter struggling to push a crumpled piece of paper into his hand. Lily looked up at him. In those wide eyes, Ethan saw fear pleading and the utter despair of someone struggling to stay afloat. Her lips fluttered, trembling as she tried to articulate something, but then she pressed them shut, her eyes flicking quickly toward Vanessa, who stood behind him, smiling benignly. "What is it, sweetie? Is this a drawing for Daddy?" Ethan took the paper. It was a picture drawn with black crayon on hospital stationery. The lines were messy and tangled. He squinted at it. It seemed to be a tall woman with long, pointed fingers, resembling sharp talons, standing next to a tiny girl. The unsettling detail was that the girl's face in the picture was entirely blank. No eyes, no nose, and most strikingly, no mouth. His phone rang again, this time a video call from London. The pressure of work immediately rushed back, drowning out the faint spark of curiosity. Ethan dismissed it as nightmares caused by the child's sedative medication. He folded the paper in half, stuffing it hastily into the pocket of the wool coat draped over the sofa near the door. "That's a lovely picture. I'll study it closely on the plane. I love you." He grabbed his coat, waved to Vanessa, and hurried out the door, his mind already calculating the figures in the financial report. He didn't look back, missing Lily's struggle to reach out to him, her mouth opening, but no sound escaping, before her little arm fell back to the bed in utter resignation. The door to room 1204 clicked shut. The dry, definitive sound of the lock separated the busy outside world from the oppressive stillness within. Ethan made his way to the airport, the roads jammed due to a massive snowstorm. After an hour of slow travel, he finally arrived, a feeling of unease settling over him. O'Hare International Airport was in chaos. The storm had deposited a blanket of thick snow, swallowing the runways and extinguishing everyone's travel plans. Flight 812 to London has been indefinitely postponed due to the record blizzard. Passengers are advised to contact the ticket counter. The automated announcement played on repeat, emotionless, cutting into Ethan's thoughts. He let out a frustrated sigh, watching the throngs of people jostling around the service desks. The most crucial business trip of the year was ruined. But strangely, instead of anger, a sense of relief crept into his chest. The image of Lily's sad eyes and the scrawled drawing he'd tucked away suddenly became vivid. Back to St. Jude Hospital, Ethan instructed the driver, slamming the car door shut, insulating himself from Chicago's bitter chill. He would go back. He would spend the night sleeping on that cramped sofa, hold his daughter's hand, and show her that her father hadn't abandoned her. The car's dashboard clock showed 2 a.m. when the vehicle pulled up outside the deserted emergency room entrance. The hospital at night presented a stark contrast to the daytime bustle. There were no congratulatory flower baskets, no superficial smiles from department heads, only the sharp, sterile scent of disinfectant and a terrifying silence. The sound of Ethan's leather dress shoes tapped a rhythm on the cold tile floor, echoing through the long, desolate corridor. Each step felt like a countdown, and a vague apprehension began to scratch at his mind. Why this anxiety? Lily was being cared for by the woman who supposedly loved her most. As he passed the VIP section nurse's station, Ethan slowed down. The lights here were dimmed, only a faint blue glow emanating from a computer screen. In the shadowy corner, head nurse Brenda was standing. She wasn't dozing off like the other staff. Her eyes were fixed on the hallway's main security monitor, her pen tapping a persistent beat on the desktop. Ethan frowned, his old annoyance flaring up. What was she doing at this hour, scrutinizing the cameras to see if he'd returned, or lurking to catch Vanessa making a mistake? He ignored Brenda's sharp gaze as it briefly swept over him, clutched his briefcase tighter, and headed straight for room 1204. The closer he got to his daughter's room, the heavier the silence became. The door to room 1204 wasn't fully closed. It was ajar, revealing a narrow sliver of light. Ethan intended to push the door open quickly and surprise them, maybe yell, "Daddy's home!" but his hand froze mid-air. Squeak, squeak, the steady sound of metal against metal accompanied by a low tittering. It wasn't the clear ringing laughter of a child, but a sharp, unnerving sound. Ethan held his breath, pressing his eye to the narrow gap in the door. The scene inside froze him instantly. Every nerve cell went numb for a moment. Vanessa was not asleep. She wasn't reading either. The woman was standing upright on the spring mattress directly over Lily's head. Her bare feet sank slightly into the mattress, establishing a firm, dominant posture. In her hands, Vanessa held not an apple or a storybook, but a heavy 500mm IV fluid bag. She was toying with it. Vanessa's arm was raised high above her head, spinning the IV bag in the air like a cowboy whirling a lasso. Centrifugal force stretched the long plastic tube, taut coiling and snapping it with each rotation. Thwack, thwack. Each time the bag reached maximum velocity, the tubing sharply tugged the indwelling catheter deeply inserted into Lily's fragile hand. Below, Lily was silent. The 8-year-old child had curled into a tight ball, her tiny hands clamped tightly over her mouth to suppress any sound of distress. Vanessa leaned down her beautiful face close to Lily's ear, her breath delivering whispers that Ethan could hear clearly in the quiet night. See that feeling dizzy, darling? Just stay sick, won't you? You are my meal ticket. If you recover, your daddy will toss me aside, won't he? She yanked the tubing hard again. Lily shuddered, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes, yet she still didn't dare remove her hands from her mouth. Ethan's world imploded. What in heaven's name was this? The image of a loving family, a devoted fiancé, the security he had paid for. Rage and disbelief clashed violently in his chest, making his fingers lose all feeling. His expensive leather briefcase slipped from his hand, slamming onto the cold tile floor of the hallway, creating a loud echoing sound that shattered the midnight stillness. Inside the room, Vanessa's movements immediately ceased. The spinning IV bag hung suspended in midair. She snapped her head toward the door, a movement as swift and decisive as a startled predator. Through the narrow gap in the door, Vanessa's wide, terror-stricken eyes met Ethan's fiery, hate-filled gaze. No words were needed. The space between them had just exploded. Vanessa's eyes locked onto Ethan's through the crack in the door, and for a fraction of a second time seemed to halt. The cold-blooded cruelty in her eyes collided with the blazing fury of the man in the hallway. Yet the thing that chilled Ethan wasn't the confrontation itself, but the horrifying speed of the transformation that swept across the woman's face. The facial muscles that were taut with malice suddenly softened, relaxing completely. The eyes that had been bulging with rage instantly filled with tears, and the mouth that had just spewed venom contorted into an expression of profound, unbearable distress. "Ethan, help me help our baby." Vanessa's piercing scream tore through the silent night, echoing down the empty corridor. She didn't drop the IV bag. Instead, she held it higher, but her hands began to shake dramatically as if she were completely exhausted from bearing an overwhelming weight. "The blood is backing up. She's having convulsions. I can't hold her steady." Ethan was speechless. Every word was choked off in his throat by this repulsive stage act. He didn't need to hear another lie. A father's primal instinct surged, overpowering his reason and the usual composure of a businessman. He burst into the room, his broad shoulders slamming into the wooden door, which crashed against the wall with a deafening noise. The distance from the door to the bed was only a few steps, but to Ethan it felt like an eternity. He saw nothing but his tiny daughter huddled on the bed and the witch standing above her. Ethan lunged forward, putting all his weight into a forceful shove against Vanessa's hip. "Get away from her!" The impact threw Vanessa off balance. She shrieked and tumbled onto the nearby upholstered sofa, the IV bag slipping from her grasp and hitting the floor with a thud. The IV tubing snapped taut and recoiled sharply, pulling the catheter in Lily's hand, causing fresh fluid to seep out and stain the white bandage. Ethan ignored Vanessa, who was groaning on the floor. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his large hands trembling as he reached out desperate to embrace the tiny, fragile life lying there. "Lily, it's Daddy. I'm back." His voice cracked a mixture of ragged breaths and overwhelming emotion. He gently lifted his daughter's thin, bleeding hand, intending to check the injury. Only one thought occupied his mind. "I will protect you. I will take you out of this nightmare immediately. Tell me, sweetie, tell Daddy what she did to you. I saw everything. Don't be afraid." But Lily's reaction was the most devastating dagger straight to Ethan's heart that night. The moment his fingers touched her cold skin, Lily jolted as if electrocuted. She didn't burst into sobs, nor did she rush into his arms for comfort, as he desperately hoped. Instead, Lily shrank away, retreating to the corner of the bed closest to the wall. Her small legs kicked wildly in the air, trying to push Ethan farther away. Lily looked up at him. In those large eyes sunken from illness, Ethan found no trust or love, only alienation, and most chillingly, sheer terror. She looked at him, then quickly glanced at Vanessa, who was still on the floor, and then back at him. "No, don't," Lily whispered, her voice hoarse from prolonged dehydration. She pulled the blanket completely over her head, trembling uncontrollably, refusing to look at her father. The commotion from the struggle had alerted the entire floor. A rush of footsteps echoed in the hallway. The night duty physician, 2 large security guards, and head nurse Brenda poured into the room. The scene before them was an inexplicable mess. The IV bag lay abandoned on the floor, fluid splattered on the sheets, Ethan kneeling with an utterly hysterical expression, and Vanessa, the woman everyone in the hospital admired, was sitting on the floor, her hair disheveled, sobbing hysterically into her hands. "What's going on here, Mr. Vance? What do you think you're doing?" the doctor shouted, rushing to help Vanessa up. Vanessa immediately seized the opportunity. She looked up, her face tear-streaked, blurring her mascara and giving her the most pitiful, tragic appearance possible. She pointed a trembling finger at Ethan. "Doctor, he's lost control. I was just holding the IV bag for Lily. The line was blocked and the blood was flowing back. I was only trying to help her." She gasped, each sob tearing at the listeners' hearts. "He suddenly rushed in. He threw me to the ground. He said I was trying to harm the baby. Doctor, he's having delusions. The stress of work must have made him lose his mind." "You're lying!" Ethan roared, jumping to his feet. He pointed directly at Vanessa, his fingers shaking with fury. "You were swinging that IV bag like a toy. You were forcing her to stay sick. You were menacing her." He turned to the doctor, grabbing the lapel of his white coat, his eyes blazing. "Can't you see? Check the cameras. Pull the footage from this room immediately. I want everyone to see what this woman does when no one is around." The older doctor gently adjusted his glasses, looking at Ethan with an expression mixing pity and professional concern. He peeled Ethan's hand off his coat, his voice dropping to a tone of practiced patience, as if speaking to a psychiatric patient. "Mr. Vance, please calm down. Don't you remember Ms. Vanessa herself requested that the camera in this room be deactivated last week? She said she wanted to protect little Lily's privacy so the child wouldn't feel monitored 24/7. You signed the agreement via email confirming your consent." Ethan was stunned. The memory flashed back like a slap. Yes. In the middle of a stressful meeting in Berlin, he had received an email from the hospital. Vanessa had texted him, "Please sign, honey, the baby is scared of the camera's red light and can't sleep." And he had signed it. He had personally blinded himself. "No, it can't be," Ethan mumbled, feeling the ground collapse beneath his feet. He looked around the room. The eyes of the doctor, the guards, even the other nurses peering in from the doorway, all viewed him as a brute, a millionaire, driven mad by stress. They only saw the devoted Vanessa, who had been present here for 4 long months, the one who always smiled and brought coffee and pastries for the staff every morning. And him, he was just the absent father who occasionally dropped in like a gust of wind before vanishing again. "Escort him out," the doctor ordered coldly. "He is agitated and posing a risk to the patient." "No, I'm not leaving. I have to protect my daughter." Ethan tried to lunge toward the bed again, but the two large security guards quickly intervened. They pinned his arms, wrenching them behind his back. The sharp pain in his shoulder was nothing compared to the agony in his heart. He was dragged toward the door. He struggled to turn his head, shouting in desperation, "Lily, look at me, honey, I won't hurt you." Lily, on the bed, the massive white blanket remained motionless. Lily did not stir. No sound of crying. No hand reached out to hold him back. Her silence was a life sentence for Ethan. She had given up on him just as she thought he had given up on her. Ethan was forcibly pushed into the hallway. The door to room 1204 slammed shut right in front of him, completely cutting off his view of his small daughter. But before the crack completely closed through the small rectangular window pane, Ethan caught one final image that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Vanessa had stood up. She was no longer weeping. She stood next to the bed, smoothing down her disheveled hair. Then she placed one hand on Lily's shoulder, looked directly out at the door where Ethan stood, and smiled. 3 o'clock in the morning. The hospital hallway was bathed in a sickly white-blue neon light, a light that made skin look like wax and everything appear lifeless. The vending machine at the end of the aisle occasionally emitted a dry clanking sound, breaking the chilling stillness. Ethan sat slumped on the cold tile floor, his back leaning against the wall opposite room 1204. The two security guards stood a few feet away, arms crossed, their eyes fixed on him like he was a dangerous criminal. They had confiscated his access badge, forbidding him from entering the room until he calmed down. Ethan buried his face in his hands. Helplessness like a giant python squeezed his chest, forcing all the air out. He had money. He had influence. He could buy the entire hospital if he wanted. But at this moment, none of it mattered. He couldn't buy his daughter's trust, and he couldn't buy the truth from those Vanessa had successfully misled. In his mind, he kept replaying the image of Vanessa's smile and Lily's look of terror. The baby wanted to tell me something. Earlier today, she tried to tell me something. The thought flashed through Ethan's mind like lightning. The picture Ethan sprang up, making the two guards jump and place their hands on their holstered devices, but he didn't charge toward the sick room. He remembered that before he left this afternoon, he had crumpled the drawing Lily gave him and discarded it somewhere, not his coat pocket. In his haste to answer the phone, he had casually tossed it into the medical waste bin in the hallway corner. Ethan rushed to the gray metal receptacle tucked away near the elevator. "Hey, you, what are you doing?" one guard shouted. Ignoring the shout, Ethan kicked open the bin's lid. A stench of alcohol, bodily fluids, and medical waste assaulted his nose. He plunged his hand inside, disregarding the filth, frantically digging through gauze covered in fluids, empty syringe casings, and latex gloves. There it was. A tightly wadded ball of paper mixed in with empty medication boxes. Ethan retrieved it with trembling hands, smoothing out the wrinkled paper under the flickering hallway light. The deep creases crisscrossed the drawing, but its content was starkly visible, cruel and painful. The black crayon lines were pressed hard into the paper, leaving deep indentations. A tall woman with blonde hair and long pointed fingers like demonic talons. Next to her, a tiny girl drawn with shaky lines. And the most shocking detail, the one he had glanced over too quickly this afternoon, the little girl's face was completely blank. No eyes to see, no nose to breathe, and no mouth to cry for help. It was Lily's self-portrait, a silent testament to her oppression, her suffocation. His daughter had been screaming in silence for the past 4 months right beside him, and he had chosen to plug his ears with his business travels. Ethan's tears fell, blurring the black crayon marks. Click. The sound of the nurse's station door opening behind him startled Ethan. He turned back quickly, concealing the drawing behind his back. Head nurse Brenda stepped out. Her face was as stern and grumpy as always, but this time the look in her eyes was devoid of fear or the usual contempt. It held only cold, hard determination. She glanced at the two guards approaching Ethan, then signaled with a sharp tilt of her head toward the small medical supply closet hidden behind the station. "Follow me, now, if you want to save your daughter." Her voice was low and gravelly, yet it carried an authority Ethan couldn't ignore. Without waiting for his reply, Brenda turned and walked away. Ethan slipped past the two bewildered guards, following Brenda into the cramped storage room. The door shut, and the sound of the latch clicking locked them away from the outside world. The room reeked of rubbing alcohol and old paper records. Tall metal shelves stacked with bottles and medicine boxes created a tight, suffocating space. No cameras here. Brenda said nothing. She walked to an old metal cabinet in the corner, pulling out a thick binder bound in a red hardcover. She turned and slammed the file onto the cold stainless steel table. Thud. The sharp noise echoed in the small room like a gunshot. "Read it. Read every word carefully, Mr. Tycoon," Brenda said, crossing her arms and leaning against a shelf. Ethan tremblingly opened the first page. These were not the neat electronic medical records Vanessa usually sent him. These were handwritten notes meticulously detailed down to the minute. A surveillance log. October 12th, father went to Tokyo. Lily's heart rate spiked to 140 at 10 p.m. Vanessa requested no one enter the room. November 25th. Father went to Dubai. Lily experienced continuous vomiting. Blood tests showed abnormally high potassium levels. Vanessa blamed it on accidental consumption of the wrong food. Ethan rapidly flipped through the pages. Dates, events, all correlating with a chilling perfection. Every time he boarded a plane, Lily's health plummeted. Every time he returned, she stabilized miraculously. I tried to report this to the administration 5 times. Brenda's voice rasped, sounding like grinding stones. But who would believe a grumpy old woman who yells at patients? They believed the beautiful, sweet fiancé who bought coffee and sweet rolls for the entire department every morning. Zero. She walked closer, pulling a small plastic box from her scrub pocket and dumping out several empty glass medicine vials onto the table. Look, these are empty vials of high-dose sedatives and heart rhythm suppressants. I found them in room 1204's private trash bin, carefully hidden inside a used tissue box. Ethan picked up a vial, his hand shaking so hard he nearly dropped it. Why didn't you call the police? The police need solid evidence, not empty vials found in a trash can. Brenda scoffed bitterly. And you think the child is alive right now thanks to a miracle? She leaned closer to Ethan, her eyes burning with suppressed anger. 3 times. 3 times I sneaked into the room when that woman was in the restroom or bragging on the phone to her friends. I swapped the medicine in the IV bag with harmless saline solution. I risked my nursing license. I risked my meager retirement to protect your daughter. You, Ethan choked up. The woman he had intensely disliked, the one he thought was rude and harsh, turned out to be Lily's only guardian angel in that personal hell. Meanwhile, he, her biological father, was the blind fool who enabled the devil. She forbade me from entering the room. She used her family member status to have me removed. Brenda continued, her voice beginning to tremble with controlled emotion. Every time I was escorted out, the child looked at me. That look, she was begging me not to leave. But I couldn't do any more. I was just a nurse. Every word Brenda spoke felt like a heavy sledgehammer blow to Ethan's head, shattering the fragile shell of his pride and success. He sank down, clutching the edge of the cold stainless steel table to keep himself from collapsing. The image of the successful father was completely gone. All that remained was a pathetic, cowardly, and guilty man. What do I do, Brenda? Help me. Please, Ethan whispered, looking up at the elderly nurse with a desperate plea. Brenda snapped the file shut. She looked at him, her expression shifting from anger to pity, and finally settling on resolve. You have money. You have influence. Use them. Don't let that woman win. She will return, and next time she won't make mistakes. The child cannot handle another dose of that medicine. Suddenly, the hospital intercom system crackled to life, tearing through the tense atmosphere. Emergency announcement. Security teams are instructed to locate and detain Mr. Ethan Vance immediately. He is exhibiting disruptive behavior, and the attending physician has requested he be isolated from patient areas. Ethan jumped. They were coming. Vanessa had deployed her next move. Brenda quickly shoved the file into Ethan's hands. "Run. Don't let them catch you now. If you're locked up, the child won't be safe. Take the fire exit staircase at the end of this storage hall. Hurry." Ethan quickly tucked the file inside his suit jacket, pressing it hard against his pounding chest. He looked at Brenda one last time. No words of thanks were needed. The eyes of the two individuals, one rich, one poor, had found complete solidarity in their single purpose, saving Lily. Ethan squeezed past the shelves of medicine, running toward the emergency exit in the corner of the room. He pushed the door open, stepping out onto the dark stairwell. The heavy footsteps of the security team echoed in the corridor just beyond the storage room door. He began to run. The sound of his shoes hitting the concrete steps merged with his frantic heartbeat. He left the worried gaze of the old nurse behind, plunging into the darkness to seek the light of justice for his daughter. The real fight was only just beginning. Ethan burst out of the hospital fire exit into the pre-dawn cold, but he felt no chill. In his suit pocket, the file Brenda had given him felt scorching hot like a burning coal. He didn't go home. He hailed a waiting cab on the corner and went straight to his family's private attorney, Mr. Martinez. The meeting took place at 4 a.m. Under the pale yellow lights of the law office, Brenda's handwritten notes and the empty medicine vials were spread across the desk. Mr. Martinez, who had served the Vance family for 3 generations, frowned, adjusting his reading glasses. "This is sufficient to obtain an emergency temporary restraining order, TRO, Ethan. The family court will grant it immediately if we emphasize the danger to the child. But remember, this is only a 24-hour solution. We need much more to prosecute her long term." 24 hours. That was the time Ethan needed to regain control of room 1204. As the sun began to rise, Ethan returned to St. Jude Hospital. This time he was accompanied by the police in a court order. Vanessa wasn't there. She had cleverly departed before sunrise, leaving a sickeningly sweet and self-pitying voice message on his phone. But Ethan didn't care. The important thing was that he now had the legal right to stay with his daughter, with no one permitted to interfere. Stepping into the room, the first thing Ethan did was not rest. The smell of the room made him sick. The scent of lavender candles and white lilies, Vanessa's signature fragrance, clung to the fabrics, the walls. It was a constant reminder of his foolish blindness. Ethan threw open the window. The cold air rushed in, sweeping away the suffocating artificial smell. He gathered all the flower arrangements, the expensive scented candles, the fashion magazines Vanessa had left behind, and dumped them all into the trash. He wanted to erase every trace of her. The room felt barer but cleaner. Lily lay on the bed, her back turned toward him. Her small shoulders rose and fell with each breath, indicating she was awake but choosing silence. A heavy, leaden silence. "Lily, it's Daddy." Ethan spoke softly, trying to keep his voice as calm as possible. No response. He awkwardly went to get a basin of warm water and a washcloth. He had never done this himself. Before it was the nanny, recently it was Vanessa. Now, holding the warm cloth, he realized how pathetically clumsy he was. "Let Daddy wipe your face, okay? It will feel better." He brought the cloth closer. Lily recoiled, curling into herself like a frightened porcupine. Her shoulders tensed up rigidly. Ethan stopped, his heart clenching. He put the cloth down, not daring to force her. At lunchtime, Ethan ordered a portion of gourmet abalone congee from the 5-star restaurant affiliated with the hospital. The dish was piping hot and aromatic, served in an exquisite white porcelain bowl. "You need to eat something, Lily. The doctor says you need strength." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, blowing gently on a spoonful of congee. He brought the spoon toward her mouth. Lily kept her face turned to the wall. "Just one bite, my girl. For Daddy, can you?" His pleading words seemed to hit a nerve in Lily. She spun around abruptly. Her large eyes, sunken from her illness, stared fixedly at him. In her gaze was not weakness, but a blaze of hostility and pent-up trauma. Clang! Lily's frail arm shot up forcefully, knocking the spoon from Ethan's hand. The hot bowl of congee flew spilling all over his expensive Italian suit. The hot porridge soaked through the fabric, burning the skin underneath. The bowl hit the floor, shattering into pieces. The stillness of the room was ripped apart. Ethan stood frozen, kanji dripping from his jacket lapel, but he paid no attention to the stain or the pain. He looked at his daughter. Lily was panting heavily, her chest violently heaving. And then, for the first time in many silent days, she spoke. Her voice was hoarse, brittle, like broken glass. "Go away, just go home. Lily." "You're just like her," Lily screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You buy kanji, you buy toys, and then you leave again. You're just pretending you hate that I'm sick because it wastes your time, right? Go, leave me alone." The child's naive words were sharp as blades, laying bare the truth Ethan had always avoided. He wasn't the victim. He was an accomplice. His absence was his permission. Ethan wasn't angry. He didn't try to explain or defend himself. He quietly stood up, took off his kanji-stained jacket, and hung it on the chair. Then he knelt on the floor. He picked up every broken shard of porcelain, big pieces, small pieces. A sharp edge sliced his finger and blood mixed with the white kanji on the floor, but he didn't stop. He cleaned everything meticulously and slowly. He accepted this rage. He deserved it. If his daughter's alienation was the punishment for his negligence, he would accept it without complaint. Night descended, enveloping the room, leaving only the soft glow of the nightlight. Ethan didn't lie down on the comfortable sofa reserved for family. He took a thin blanket from the closet and spread it directly on the cold floor right beside Lily's bed. This position was lower than hers. He no longer wanted to stand above and look down. He wanted to be in a position where Lily could see him the moment she opened her eyes, but without feeling overwhelmed. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the air purifier. Ethan lay on his back staring at the ceiling and began to speak. His voice was deep and warm, echoing softly in the darkness. "Once, your grandma used to tell me about the stars. She said whenever someone felt sad, they should look up. He didn't tell fairy tales about rescued princesses. He spoke about himself, about his own lonely childhood days when his parents were busy, about the first time he held Lily, the fear he felt because she was so tiny. I'm sorry, Lily. I thought bringing home money was how I showed you I loved you. I was wrong. I lost you right here in my own home." His voice trembled, catching in his throat. A hot tear rolled down his cheek, soaking the thin pillow on the floor. In this position, the power and prestige of a billionaire meant nothing. He was just a regretful father. On the bed, Lily remained still, her back still turned, but her quiet sobs had ceased. Her breathing gradually became steadier. The small hand that had been clutching the edge of the blanket slowly relaxed. The exhaustion from 2 sleepless nights finally claimed Ethan. He drifted off in a cramped position on the floor, his hand loosely resting near the foot of the bed like a clumsy guard. In the faint glow of the nightlight, Lily slowly opened her eyes. She softly turned over. Her wide eyes looked down at the edge of the bed. Daddy was sleeping there, on the floor. No suit, no phone, no pretense of grandeur, just a tired man with a bandage on his finger. The wall of ice around her heart hadn't melted, but a tiny crack had appeared. The sharp wariness in Lily's eyes began to soften, yielding to a small touch of childhood curiosity and doubt. Lily timidly extended a tiny hand from under the blanket. Her thin fingers hovered in the air, just inches above Ethan's messy hair. She wanted to touch him to see if he was real, or just an illusion that would vanish by morning. Lily's finger lowered only millimeters away from his hair. Ding! Ethan's phone, resting on the floor, suddenly lit up brightly. The emergency notification light flashed red, repeatedly tearing apart the stillness. Lily flinched quickly, pulling her hand back into the blanket. The fragile moment of connection had been instantly crushed. The phone screen remained bright, displaying a series of urgent news alerts with bold headlines. The storm had truly hit. The next morning, Ethan wasn't woken by birdsong or a gentle alarm. He was jolted awake by the frantic ringing of his phone, sounding like a siren. He rubbed his eyes and grabbed the phone. Hundreds of missed calls, thousands of messages. and when he opened the news app, Vanessa's tear-streaked face was plastered across the front page. Billionaire Ethan Vance's fiancée accuses him of battery and blocking access to sick stepchild. The ugly truth about the elite family tycoon uses drugs, suffers delusions, ejects devoted mother. Ethan sat bolt upright, cold sweat running down his back. Vanessa hadn't sat idle. She had held a press conference early this morning at a hotel lobby across from the hospital. In the video, Vanessa appeared heartbreakingly frail. She was makeup-free, wearing an oversized shirt, her eyes swollen. She wept uncontrollably before a forest of microphones, detailing how she had sacrificed her career to care for Lily, and how Ethan, in a fit of drug-induced paranoia and work stress, had physically assaulted her, ripping the child from her arms as she tried to save her life. "I don't need his money," Vanessa sobbed on screen, her performance perfect, down to every little tremor. "I just want to be with my daughter. She needs me. He doesn't know how to care for her. He can't even remember what she's allergic to." Public opinion turned on a dime. Vicious comments flooded social media. Cruel billionaire, terrible father, justice for the stepmother. The stock of Vance Estates began to freefall on the exchange. Board members called their voices cold and demanding that Ethan temporarily step down to handle the PR disaster. The room door opened. Mr. Martinez, Ethan's lawyer, entered. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by extreme seriousness and anxiety. "Turn off the television, Ethan. Don't watch anymore." Ethan looked at his lawyer, clutching his phone so tightly his knuckles were white. "She's lying. We have Brenda's testimony. We have the falsified medical records." The testimony of a recently terminated nurse, Vanessa, had quickly managed to have Brenda suspended this morning for procedural violations and empty vials found in a trash can. Don't carry enough weight in the court of public opinion. Right now, Ethan. Martinez sighed, putting his briefcase on the table. But that's not the worst news. He pulled out a stack of legal documents. This morning, Vanessa's legal team filed a motion with the family court. They aren't just suing you for slander. They are petitioning to strip you of Lily's custody. What, I'm her biological father? Do you remember Lily's mother's will? Martinez opened a page of the document. There was a codicil. Should the biological father be deemed legally incapacitated or proven to endanger the child's safety, custody and management of the trust fund shall be transferred to the woman legally caring for the child or an appointed fiduciary. Ethan was dumbfounded. He vaguely remembered that clause. His ex-wife had included it out of fear of his busy work schedule. Vanessa knew. She had studied it thoroughly. She has provided the court with a set of medical records, Martinez continued, his voice low. Signed by the department head, a man she bought off. It confirms your history of anxiety disorders, substance use, and long-term parental neglect. With public opinion currently on her side, the probability of the court issuing a temporary order to revoke your custody is 90%. 90%. A number as cold as a death sentence. Ethan stepped back, his back lightly hitting the window glass. He looked down at the street. Crowds of reporters surrounded the hospital gate like vultures waiting for a carcass. Satellite vans were parked bumper to bumper. Everyone was waiting for his downfall. He turned back to look at Lily. She was sitting on the bed, hugging her knees. She didn't understand what was happening, but she sensed the tension, the fear engulfing the room. Lily looked at Ethan, her eyes worried. Daddy is scared. This big man is trembling. Ethan realized he was backed into a corner. He could lose his career, his reputation, all his assets. But the most terrifying prospect was losing Lily. If Vanessa won, she would take the child away. And this time, in the shadow of legal guardianship, she would slowly, secretly extinguish her life. The emergency hearing is scheduled for the next 24 hours. Martinez warned, gathering his papers. I will try to stall, but Ethan, you need a miracle, absolute evidence, something undeniable. The lawyer left, leaving Ethan alone in the suffocating room. Desperation squeezed his throat. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, pacing the room like a trapped animal. He looked around the familiar space. The hospital bed, the medicine cabinet, the sofa, the sterile white walls. Somewhere in here there had to be a way out. Somewhere the truth had to be hiding. Vanessa was meticulous, but she was also arrogant. She always wanted to control everything. Would she have left any trace behind? Knock, knock. The knock on the door was dry and abrupt. The door opened. It wasn't a doctor nor a nurse. A man in a gray suit, his face impassive, entered. On his chest, he wore the badge of the family court. "Mr. Ethan Vance." "Yes. I'm here to serve you with an emergency summons and a temporary order restricting contact with the minor child, as requested by the plaintiff, Vanessa Cruz." The man extended a document stamped with a glaring red seal. The world spun around Ethan. They had come faster than he thought. They had come to take his daughter away right now. Ethan took the paper with trembling hands. He backed away instinctively, as if trying to flee this harsh reality. His foot caught the chair leg. He stumbled back another step, his back hitting the tall oak cabinet near the corner of the room. Bam! The strong impact made the cabinet shudder. On top of the cabinet, where few people would look, a dusty old brown teddy bear, the first gift Vanessa had given Lily to win her over, was violently shaken. It wobbled, tipping toward the edge of the cabinet, then slowly slid off its perch, falling headfirst toward the floor. The bear's shiny black plastic eyes catching the room, light flashed a strange glint. The teddy bear teetered on the cabinet edge before falling and hitting the hard tile floor with a heavy, hollow thump. The sound wasn't loud, but in the midnight silence, it cut through the tense atmosphere gripping Ethan. Ethan snapped out of his despairing trance. He bent down, his hands still shaking from the court summons, and picked up the teddy bear. It was a dark brown bear, its fur already worn and dusty, one ear frayed, the first gift Vanessa brought to the hospital, the thing she once called Lily's companion. But the moment Ethan's fingers closed around the bear's body, he froze. Something felt wrong. Its weight distribution was uneven. The bear's head was disproportionately heavy, leaning far forward, much heavier than any amount of stuffing should account for. Ethan frowned gently, kneading the bear's forehead. Beneath the soft fur was a hard, cold, angular object. "Daddy?" A whispered weak call came from the bed, making Ethan spin around. Lily had woken up from the noise. She was huddled under the covers, her eyes wide in the dark, fixed on the teddy bear in her father's hand. Lily's tiny index finger pointed directly at the bear's left eye, the one made of shiny black plastic. It watches me," Lily whispered, her breath coming in short, anxious gasps. "Even when Mother Vanessa isn't here, that eye still looks at me. A red light flashes in its eye at night. I'm so scared." Ethan was stunned. A red light. Normal teddy bears don't have red lights. A cold surge ran down his spine, sweeping away all fatigue. Suspicion flared up into a fierce blaze. He placed the bear on the desk, turning on the brightest lamp. Reaching for the box cutter in the pen holder, Ethan took a deep breath. "Let Daddy take a look. Nothing will harm you anymore." The sharp knife blade made a decisive slice along the seam at the back of the bear's neck. The fabric parted. Ethan reached inside, pulling out all the white cotton stuffing. And what lay deep within the core made his heart skip a beat. A small black metal box the size of a matchbox was securely fastened to the plastic frame of the bear's eye. It was connected to a large external battery pack and a memory card slot. Ethan immediately recognized the device. It was a high-end spy camera disguised as a toy, capable of recording continuously for weeks with highly sensitive motion detection. Why would Vanessa place this here? The answer flashed in his mind like lightning. Control. Vanessa was obsessed with the idea that he might reunite with his ex-wife, or that he might suspect her motives. She planted the camera not to monitor Lily, but to monitor him. She wanted to eavesdrop on every phone call he made during his visits, to know if he was speaking ill of her. "Hoist with your own petard," Ethan muttered, his trembling hand pulling the micro SD card out of the slot. Vanessa's pathological mistrust was the very thing that would undo her. This device didn't discriminate. It recorded every single movement in this hospital room, whether it was Ethan or Vanessa herself. Ethan opened his laptop, his hands shaking so badly that it took 3 attempts to insert the memory card into the reader slot. The computer screen flashed. Hundreds of video files appeared labeled by date and time. Ethan clicked on the most recent file recorded last week while he was in London for the board meeting. The video appeared, the image slightly shaky due to the high-angle perspective, but the audio was crystal clear. On the screen, Vanessa was sitting on the edge of the bed. She wasn't reading nor peeling fruit. She was filing her nails, the shh, shh sound gratingly loud. Lily lay next to her, coughing heavily. "Quiet down." Vanessa's voice in the video was sharp, utterly unlike her usual sweet tone. "Why are you coughing so much? You're giving me a headache." "I'm thirsty. Water, please," Lily's weak voice pleaded. Vanessa sighed, standing up. She didn't get water. She pulled a mysterious pill packet from her purse, popping out a blue pill. "Take this. You'll sleep and you won't be thirsty anymore." "I don't want to. It's bitter. My stomach hurts." "I said drink it." Vanessa pinched Lily's mouth shut, forcing the child to dry swallow the pill. "You're a burden to me. You know that if it weren't for your mother's stupid trust fund, I'd have dumped you at an orphanage ages ago." Ethan clamped a hand over his mouth, suppressing the rising nausea in his stomach. He fast-forwarded the video. Another scene appeared. Vanessa was on the phone, pacing the room with a look of excitement. "Don't worry, old Ethan believes everything. He just wired another 50 grand. That little brat is nearly an invalid. The doctor says if we maintain the high potassium levels for another month, her nervous system will be permanently compromised. Custody will be mine then, and we'll drain that fund. Go ahead and finalize the paperwork for the house in Malibu." Ethan bent over, resting his forehead on the cold edge of the desk. Hot tears spilled out not from sorrow, but from self-loathing. In those videos, he occasionally saw glimpses of himself, a father who rushed in, kissed his daughter's forehead, and immediately left, abandoning his little girl to the clutches of a wicked person. He had been there, but he had been blind. He lifted his head, looking toward Lily. She was still watching him, waiting. "Daddy," Ethan said nothing. He frantically copied all the data onto 3 different external hard drives, one copy uploaded to a secure cloud server. The last 2 were sent straight to his lawyer, Mr. Martinez, and the regional police chief. He closed the laptop and stood up. His face was set, the soft lines of hesitation entirely gone. All that remained was the terrifying resolve of a father ready to flatten the entire world to safeguard his child. Ethan walked to the bedside, placed his large hand over his left chest, where his heart hammered wildly, and looked straight into Lily's eyes. "Daddy has to leave for a moment, just a moment. I promise when I come back, the nightmare will be over." He turned and quickly exited the sick room. His hand clenched the tiny memory card in his pants pocket, holding it so tightly that its sharp edges dug painfully into his skin. But he needed that pain. He needed it to stay focused. This was more than just evidence. This was his daughter's life. The city police precinct was bustling with the activity of the night shift. Telephones ringing, the clatter of keyboards and hurried footsteps created a chaotic symphony. But in the special interrogation suite, everything was deathly silent. The heavy steel door scraped open with a jarring screech. Ethan stepped into the observation room. On the other side of the one-way mirror, Vanessa was seated. She was still wearing her expensive silk pajamas draped loosely with a fur shawl, the attire she was in when police raided her penthouse apartment at 3 a.m. But her usual haughty, elegant demeanor had vanished. Her makeup was smeared with tears, and the struggle revealing gray skin and the fine lines of age she always tried to conceal. Her carefully manicured hands were cuffed to the metal table bolted to the floor. Vanessa was staring intently at the tablet placed before her, where the video footage from the teddy bear's eye was playing on loop. Her expression shifted from astonishment to horror, finally settling on a frightening, resentful glare. "Would you like to go in?" the chief detective asked Ethan. Yes. Ethan walked through the separating door, entering the cold room that smelled strongly of stale cigarettes and fear. He pulled the metal chair opposite Vanessa and sat down. The air between them was thick, heavy, like lead. Vanessa slowly raised her head. When she saw Ethan, she showed no remorse. She didn't bother playing the weak victim anymore. The mask was shattered and she made no attempt to pick up the pieces. Ethan placed a printed photo from the video onto the table. In the picture, Vanessa was pinching Lily's mouth shut, forcing her to swallow a pill. "Why?" Ethan asked. His voice was strangely calm, without shouting or cursing, just a hollow question echoing from the depths of despair. "I gave you everything. Money, unlimited credit cards. Anything you wanted I provided. Why be so cruel to an innocent child?" Vanessa looked at him, then suddenly burst into laughter, a maniacal cackling sound that echoed within the four sealed walls, the laughter of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. "Everything you think you gave me everything." Vanessa stopped laughing, her eyes burning with contempt and mockery. "You gave me money, yes, but what did you treat me as, an expensive piece of window dressing next to the billionaire or a high-end nanny?" She leaned forward, ignoring the clanking of the handcuffs against the table, spitting out each word at Ethan. "You ask me why I did it. Look at yourself, Ethan. You are the main reason." "What are you talking about?" Ethan frowned. "Don't play innocent," Vanessa shouted, her voice hoarse with agitation. "Your negligence, your ambition, and your habit of trying to buy affection with money created the perfect opportunity for me to do all of this." She took a deep breath, her voice becoming razor sharp. "Why did you hire me to be your daughter's mother? So you could be free to chase another few $1 billion? So you could fly around the world without hearing your child cry, without staying up all night when she was sick? You saw the child wasting away, but you ignored it. You wanted to believe my sweet lies more than you wanted to face the difficult reality that your child was slowly dying." Ethan was paralyzed. His hand gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles were white. He wanted to argue, to say she was a deceitful devil, but his throat closed up. "You were my silent accomplice, Ethan." Vanessa whispered, a twisted smile on her lips. "If you had given that child 1/10 of the time you devoted to your work, I would never have had the chance to touch her. You opened the door, invited me in, and handed me the weapon. Now you play the role of the grieving father hypocrite." Every word Vanessa spoke felt like a poisoned needle piercing Ethan's conscience. She was partly right. A brutal, naked truth. He didn't administer the poison directly, but his neglect was the first poison that destroyed Lily's spirit. He created the glass cage, and Vanessa was merely the one who stepped in to commit the atrocity. The room fell silent. Only Vanessa's ragged breathing and Ethan's heavy heartbeat remained. Ethan slowly rose to his feet. He looked at the woman before him one last time. There was no hatred left, no anger. In his eyes now was only pity. Pity for a soul twisted by greed, and pity for his own blindness. "You are partly right, Vanessa." Ethan said, his voice deep and sorrowful. "I was wrong. I was a terrible father. But the difference between you and me is that I still have a chance to make amends. As for you, you will have the rest of your life in prison to think about what you've done." He turned and walked away, not looking back at the woman who was beginning to shriek and curse behind him. "Stop, Ethan. Don't you dare walk away like that. You are guilty too. You are guilty too." Ethan pushed the doors open and stepped out. The steel door slammed shut, cutting off the wild screams separating the two worlds. The police precinct corridor was long, desolate, and cold. Ethan couldn't move forward. He leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time that night, he cried. They weren't tears of relief for catching the culprit. They were tears of profound remorse. This legal victory didn't erase his guilt. Vanessa's sentence was determined, but the sentence of conscience for him was only just beginning. Two large police officers approached the interrogation room door. They pulled Vanessa up by her arms, dragging her toward the holding cells. The sound of her feet shuffling on the concrete floor grew distant, faded, and then disappeared completely. Only Ethan remained sitting alone under the flickering fluorescent lights, facing the long, solitary shadow of himself on the cold floor. The battle against the external demon was over, but the fight to reclaim himself and his daughter was only now truly underway. The sound of Vanessa's footsteps died away at the end of the police station hallway, leaving Ethan immersed in heavy silence. 3 months passed since that fateful nighttime, stretching endlessly interspersed with meetings with lawyers and long nights spent vigil by his daughter's bedside. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray, overcast autumn morning. There were no dramatic arguments or eloquent appeals, unlike those seen in movies. Everything was swift and clinical, like a surgeon's blade excising a malignant tumor. When the video from the teddy bear's eye was displayed on the large court screen, the entire courtroom fell quiet. No one dared to breathe. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table, her face bowed, her shoulders visibly trembling. She knew no amount of lies could mask the brutal truth exposed to the jury. Defendant Vanessa Cruz sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The judge's gavel struck the wood with a dry, definitive sound. It was the sound of finality. Vanessa was led away by police, not once looking back at Ethan. She disappeared behind a side door, taking with her a past full of deceit and ambition. Ethan let out a long breath, but his chest still didn't feel lighter. He looked over to the witness stand where Nurse Brenda was standing. She wore her faded nurse's uniform, her rough hands clasped together. She had just finished her testimony, delivered clearly and firmly, recounting every instance she had secretly swapped the medication to save Lily's life. Outside the courthouse, Ethan waited for Brenda on the stone steps. When she emerged, he approached her, bowing his head low. "Nurse Brenda." "Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice still holding that familiar edge of gruffness. "It's all over. I have a proposition, no a plea." Ethan looked up, meeting the eyes of the woman he once despised. "I've sold the mansion. Lily and I are moving to a small house in the suburbs. I don't know how to care for a child in recovery. I need a grandmother figure for her, someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Could you possibly come and live with us?" Brenda looked at Ethan, at the black suit that now looked a bit loose on his thinner frame. She saw the sincerity in his deeply etched eyes. "My pension's quite small. You'd better pay me what I'm worth." Brenda cleared her throat, trying to conceal the faint smile playing on her lips. "And I won't wear a maid's uniform, mind you." "You can wear whatever you like." Ethan chuckled, the first genuine laugh he had had in months. Back at St. Jude Hospital, the atmosphere in room 1204 was completely transformed. The heavy antiseptic odor seemed to have faded, replaced by the soft, late-afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. Lily sat on the bed, swinging her legs. The IV line, the heart monitor, all the restraints that had tethered her to this bed, were gone. She wore a simple light blue cotton dress, looking small but much more vibrant. Ethan stood in the corner, holding expensive dolls and unopened Lego sets, the flashy gifts he had once used money to buy his daughter's affection. He placed each item into a large cardboard box labeled "Donations." "Are you getting rid of everything, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice still a little raspy but clear. Ethan paused, turning to look at his daughter. "Yes, these things aren't for us anymore. Is there anything you want to keep?" Lily shook her head. She pointed to a small box on the nightstand. "I just need my crayons and books." Ethan nodded, packing up the last few items. Then he took a stack of papers from his briefcase. It was his resignation as CEO and the company transfer of authority documents. He signed them with a resolute stroke of the pen. No more all-night meetings, no more endless flights. He had also signed the papers to sell the magnificent mansion, a place filled with cold memories of his neglect. From now on, they would start over from the emotional ground zero. Finished cleaning, Ethan walked to the bedside. Out of old habit, he instinctively reached to pick the child up quickly to rush to the car, but he stopped himself. He remembered the therapist's advice, let her lead. He lowered his hand, standing there waiting patiently. He extended one hand toward Lily, palm up, calloused and bare of any expensive watch. "Shall we go home now, Lily, to our new home?" Lily looked at her father's hand. Before this hand was always clutching a phone, always rushing, always pushing her away to handle business. But now it rested there quietly waiting for her. She looked up into his eyes. The urgency was gone, replaced only by raw remorse and an awkward but genuine love. The space filled with silence. The wall clock ticked rhythmically. Then, very slowly, Lily's small, frail fingers timidly reached out. She didn't grasp his whole hand. She gently hooked her index finger around Ethan's pinky finger, a loose grip as delicate as a dragonfly's wing, but to Ethan, its weight was greater than any $1,000,000 contract he had ever signed. It was the weight of forgiveness. Ethan held his breath, afraid that if he exhaled too heavily, she would withdraw her hand. He slowly squeezed his pinky finger, holding on to that precious connection. A hot tear threatened to escape, but he swallowed it down. Today was a day for joy. "Let's go, sweetie." Ethan guided Lily off the bed. Her feet touched the ground, taking her first steady steps after months of being confined. Nurse Brenda was waiting at the door, holding a bag of vitamins and smiling at the sight of the father and daughter. The three of them walked down the long hospital corridor. The late afternoon sunlight stretched their shadows long and close together on the tile floor. They walked past the reception desk, past the doctors who had once looked at them with suspicion, and straight out the main entrance. Outside, no sleek black limousine was waiting, only a silver family SUV, the ordinary car Ethan had just purchased. He opened the back door, helped Lily into the seat, and carefully fastened her seatbelt. Brenda sat in the passenger seat up front. Ethan got into the driver's seat. He glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing Lily leaning her face against the window glass. He started the engine. The car slowly pulled away, leaving behind the towering St. Jude building, the smell of antiseptic, the sleepless nights, and the ghost of the past. Lily lowered the window. The wind rushed in, ruffling her sparse hair. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The air outside smelled of city dust, but to Lily, it was the smell of freedom. She opened her eyes, looking up at the sky. Soft white clouds drifted across the clear blue canvas, free and boundless, just like the new life unfolding before her. 6 months later. Birdsong echoed throughout the small garden filled with weeds and wildflowers in the suburbs. Bright morning sunlight poured through the wooden window frame, dancing on the floorboards. In the cozy small kitchen, Ethan stood at the stove. He wore a brightly patterned floral apron, a housewarming gift that Brenda had insisted he wear. The man who once ran a business empire was now sweating profusely over a frying pan. "All right, flip time. 1, 2, 3. Ethan muttered, holding the spatula to turn the eggs. He applied a little too much force. Hot oil splattered onto his arm, making him jump back in surprise. Plop! The entire egg fell back into the pan, breaking apart. Shell mixed with the yolk. A pungent smell of burnt food immediately filled the air. The edges of the egg turned a charred, dark brown in seconds. Ethan sighed deeply, turning off the heat. The plate of fried eggs looked pathetic, misshapen, and blackened, a far cry from the luxurious 5-star meals he used to attend. It's ruined again. Just then, the sound of bare feet running pat-pat on the wooden floor heralded Lily's arrival in the kitchen. She was noticeably taller, her cheeks round and rosy. She wore clothes stained with paint and garden dirt, the sign of a child free to explore the world. Lily scrambled onto a dining chair. Looking at the plate of burnt eggs Ethan sheepishly set on the table. "I'm sorry, sweetie, I ruined it again. Let me make you another one." Ethan scratched his head, reaching to take the plate away, but Lily held on to the plate. She picked up a fork, cutting a large piece of the egg, complete with bits of shell and the charred edges, and put it happily into her mouth. "It's good, Daddy. Crunchy." Lily giggled, her smile brightening the entire kitchen. Brenda leaned against the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, smiling and shaking her head at the father and daughter. She didn't intervene. She knew they needed these clumsy moments to heal. After finishing her bite of egg, Lily wiped her mouth and jumped off the chair. "I made something for you, Daddy." She dashed off to her room and returned immediately with a brand new drawing on paper. She carefully placed it on the table, smoothing out the paper. Ethan picked up the picture. Gone were the gloomy black colors. The drawing was vibrant and full of color, primarily warm yellows. In the picture, a man in a floral apron stood holding a smoking black pan. Beside him was a little girl, laughing wholeheartedly. And the most important detail, the one that made Ethan's heart clench with emotion, a bright red, widely drawn mouth. His daughter had found her voice. His daughter had found her smile. Ethan stood up, retrieved a magnet, and affixed the drawing to the most prominent spot on the refrigerator, right next to the schedule reminder for their walk in the park. He turned back, opening his arms wide. Lily didn't hesitate, rushing into her father's embrace. Ethan lifted his daughter, spinning her around the small kitchen. Lily's clear, joyous laughter echoed through the wooden house, blending with the bird song from the garden. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting the entwined shadows of the father and daughter onto the warm wooden floor. On the table, the half-eaten burnt egg remained, and on the refrigerator, the vibrant picture shone brightly. Perfection was not found in a luxurious mansion or expensive meals. It was right here in this imperfect but love-filled moment. And that concludes tonight's bedtime story. What an emotionally charged journey we've been on, witnessing Ethan's desperate fight to save his daughter and ultimately to save himself. It's a poignant reminder that even the most powerful people can be blinded by ambition, and that the greatest riches in life are often found right under our noses. I hope these heartwarming stories and touching stories resonate deeply with you. How did Lily's courage and Ethan's eventual realization make you feel? Did you find yourself rooting for the unlikely hero? Nurse Brenda. Share your thoughts with us below. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. This narrative about finding true connection, forgiveness, and beginning anew offers us a profound human lesson. Presence is the most valuable currency we possess. Don't trade the priceless moments of connection for the pursuit of material success. May you carry the warmth of Lily's healing and the wisdom of Ethan's redemption into your own night. Sleep well, and may your tomorrow be filled with connection and joy.